Don't get it twisted, thought that you could fix it. Call it your best shot, how did you miss it? Closing in the distance, pay off for penance. Ain't no textbook, tell you when it's finished. I mean, not to mention, ain't that your business? Did you ever think you could be forgiven? Even if I listen, stop playing victim. Show you all the wounds I already had open. Easier said than done. I'm tired of living on the run. Twisted, twisted, foolish child broken, looking for his mother, trying to find her in every woman that he called a lover. That's how he shows her all of his power, keeper of the secrets, but he's a coward to let go all of the control. South Node Scorpio, I've been trying to fix it with just my lyrics, but I gotta find the heart to do it. Well, this is easier said than done. I'm tired of living on the run. I need help. Do you want no exception? You gotta love yourself. How could this happen? Forgive yourself. Nobody could do that, just me and myself. But I got it twisted. Oh, I got it twisted. Pull another card out, reading the spoken. There were 7 swans in formation, pulling all the bones now. I got a clean house. I'm so hard on everybody, especially myself. Take off my tattoos. I'm just a regular dude inside a costume. Under my skin, I got game in it. I made pain with it. I became the same shame, I know, cause I was born from it. Easier once it's done. I'm tired of living on the run. I need help. Do you want no exception? You gotta love yourself. How could this happen? Forgive yourself. Nobody can do that, just me and myself. But I got it twisted. Oh, I got it twisted. I need help. You want no exception, you gotta love yourself. How could this happen? Forgive yourself. Nobody could do that, just me and myself. I got it twisted. Oh, I got it twisted. I got it twisted. Oh, I got it twisted.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with our Reclaiming Native Psychological Brilliance. If Emily, you would go ahead and take the wheel.
Morning, everyone. My name is Emily Field, and I'm an evaluation specialist here at the United South and Eastern Tribes. Just some participation tips and asks. We're building a community, so please introduce yourself in the chat, introduce your tribal nation, whose ancestral lands you're on, what organization you work for, your position. We want to know who you are and want to share with everybody. Everyone's going to be muted until the last portion, which will be participant reflections. If you do want to speak out loud, please use the raise your hand feature. If you prefer to speak into the chat, just use the chat that you can speak into throughout the hour. And then you'll receive a link to the recording of this presentation by the end of the week. And next slide, it'll be loaded onto our YouTube page. This activity is jointly provided by the United South and Eastern Tribes and Kurdiya Services. In completing this activity, which means spending the whole hour with us and then completing an evaluation, you can get a certificate of completion, or we are offering continuing education units in medical, nursing, and counseling. Again, you're going to have to fill out the evaluation, which will be a link that I will share towards the end of the hour in the chat. It will also be shared in the post session communication in case you miss it. And yeah, if you have any questions, please contact Paige O'Sullivan at Cardia Services or anyone at USET, and we can pass along your question.
We're also offering social work credits as well.
Social work. Next slide. And then no relevant financial relationships to disclose for this activity. And on to Bernice. Thank you.
Welcome, all my relations and friends. Mitakue Oyase. My name is Bernice Jordan, and I am one of the Public Health Program Manager here at USET. Next slide. So this, we just want to acknowledge that you are on Indigenous land. You could either text your zip code into this number or go ahead and click on the link, and you will be able to see where you're located at. Next slide. So we are reconnecting with our Indigenous community. Thanks for being a part of reclaiming our collective stories. So what you see here are dots. These dots represent a location. So there are hundreds of people right now that are on this call or will be on this call that have registered. So thanks again. Next slide. I want to introduce Holly Echo Hawk. She will be continuing on with the presentation for this morning. Good morning, good afternoon, Holly.
Hi, everybody. Holly Echo Hawk here. I am just thrilled to see you all today and being part of our Reclaiming Native Psychological Brilliance series. And it is, in fact, a series. We do design each month to bridge to the next month's topic. And so we just want to show you, many of you were with us when we started in January of this year with an introduction to the Reclaiming series. Reclaiming is intentional. Native people are brilliant. They are born brilliant. It's in our DNA, and we want to put that up front. So we're reclaiming our brilliance. Then in February, we focused on Native youth. Those of you that were with us, that was fabulous. All of these recordings are available. They're all 1 hour in length. March, we had Dr. Jeff King, who did a really fascinating presentation on the influence of Indigenous people on modern psychology. And then some of the disconnects with that. And then last month, we had Dr. Art Martinez and Mike Duncan from the Native Dads Network, and they did a fabulous presentation on Native help declining and Native help seeking. So that's where we are at. And the next slide, please, Brian. So I am incredibly pleased and we are all honored to have Dr. Bigfoot and Dr. Susan Schmidt with us today to share their expertise and decades of experience in Native trauma treatment. And they're also going to share their knowledge about post-traumatic growth. So a couple of things about post-traumatic growth, which is a topic that's a very personal interest to me. I have a lot of respect for post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that it happens. We know it's a diagnosis, and but I personally don't like to get too stuck in deficit-based medical model terms, because I see post-traumatic growth everywhere, and I see it in the brilliance of Native people. And I know that many Native people, including myself, who have experienced trauma or loss of close friends or loss of parents, when your world is shattered, we come back, and sometimes we're stronger, and that's post-traumatic growth. There's positive change that can come out of trauma. I got really interested in this quite a few years back when I read the study that was done in the post Katrina study. They were originally studying, had a research study of African-American Black moms. And then Katrina happened, which I don't even know what year that was, but it was sometime back, a huge hurricane that flooded New Orleans. So they revamped the study and they focused on looking at how did these moms survive, what happened to them after the horrible trauma of Katrina. And what some of the findings that came out of that study was about post-traumatic growth. So it wasn't just all negative. There were some really positive things that came out of it. So that's where I got originally very interested in post-traumatic growth, and I couldn't be happier to have Dr. Bigfoot and Dr. Schmidt talk to us today about what they know and their deep experience on this topic. So I will turn it over to Dr. Bigfoot. The next slide.
Hi, good afternoon. We're thrilled to be with you. I'm Dolores Tabia Bigfoot. I'm at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center and run the Indian Country Child Trauma Center and part of the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. My colleague is Susan Schmidt, and I'll turn it over to her for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. And thank you so much, Holly and team, for the invitation and for taking care of us and giving us this opportunity today. I'm a psychologist also at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, where I direct our Child Trauma Services program, where we provide not only outpatient treatment and trauma-focused CBT and other forms of interventions, but we also do statewide and national training in this particular intervention as well. And have been fortunate to be able to collaborate with Dee for several years in the training and dissemination of this particular model. So thank you, and it's great to be with you today.
What we are going to talk about today is the cultural adaptation of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which we culturally enhance to honoring children mending the circle. So it's a culturally based trauma treatment for children. And what this does is address the trauma and helps them master those trauma reminders and be able to function and grow and thrive and have enthusiasm and joy and recognize that they can encounter other kinds of things that may be devastating, but because of their capacity to master the trauma reminders, trauma triggers, that they can have a fulfilling life. Not only the children, but their family members, their parents, their caregivers. So it's we involve caregivers within this model of honoring children mending the circle. And this is from our Indian Country Child Trauma Center, our little hummingbird. So next slide. What our model is taking a more holistic viewpoint, looking at not only the cognitive behavioral part of the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral model, but expanding that to this circle where we have the mental with the cognition, we have the physical with the behavioral, but we also extended it to the relational with all of our relatives, and also the connection with animals, plants, the universe, the emotional in terms of within the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral model, it has affect. So we have this emotional element, and then the spiritual, and that this enhanced model of TFCBT has these 5 core elements. And recognizing there's always been trauma in our tribal communities, and that balance was an important part of managing one's life, that recognize that trauma can create an imbalance, and that it creates that disharmony in one or more of these personal dimensions of relational, mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, and that it can impact how an individual functions across, the multiple areas of life that we encounter, from, early childhood on into adulthood. Next slide. And as we think about the model, honoring children mending the circle, we want to acknowledge, as part of the psychoeducational part, that there is different types of trauma. And so we provide the language, the understanding of what trauma is, and the different ways that trauma has impacted our tribal communities. So cultural trauma, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma. Next slide. And one of the worksheets that we have for this is to be able to show the different impacts of trauma, and that collective or cumulative trauma that comes together. But individually, there might be violence, there might be child abuse, there might be domestic violence. So you can see the more colorful circles there, and that would be what a individual may experience, and they can. So as a therapist, you would be working with a client to personalize what that particular trauma is, because understanding how trauma impacts how a person thinks, how a person feels, their relationship is real important. It's the beginning to understand how to master and grow from the impact of trauma. And then recognizing that there's that individual impact of trauma, but there's also oppression, just the history of oppression, poverty and the effects of poverty, and then historical events that may be part of this. This historical events may be things like Katrina. They may be things like displacement. They may be, boarding school. More family-specific events that might be contributing might be, missing, murdered, or exploited family members, or it might be, the family history of children missing or dying at boarding school. Tribe or location-specific events might be removal. It might be, rivers being dammed. It might be contamination of land or water. It could be any particular thing. So this gives that view for a family to see what are the things that have impacted a particular individual, and being able to put words to that so that the next steps can occur. So next slide.
So these pictures are of our kind of cherished survivor tree here in Oklahoma City. So in 1995, we experienced the Oklahoma City bombing. I wasn't yet living in the city at that time, but have since, I moved here in 99, and have since certainly lived with the echoes of that experience within our community, within the families that we serve. And I think it's such a lesson to us for understanding trauma and post-traumatic growth. And wanted to share just some visual examples of this survivor tree. This was a tree that survived that kind of most significant blast within this experience, and it's a lesson, I think, to us and what survival and what thriving and post-traumatic growth can look like. We have on the left side a picture of a tree that has been able to grow as it's anticipated, as it's planned, and then the experience of something like the trauma of the bombing happens, and destruction takes place, and then we see growing through and growing beyond this. And that picture to the right for me is A good reminder of what post-traumatic growth is, that after difficult and traumatic experiences, we are forever changed. We are forever impacted. Who we were before isn't who we will be in the future, but that person that we're becoming as a result of these experiences doesn't have to be less than. That there's beauty in the brokenness, there's beauty in the healing and the growth through these experiences, and there's strength in that as well. And for me, as primarily a trauma treatment specialist, a trauma therapist working with children and their families after these experiences, this is that guiding light of how do we support youth in growing through and growing stronger from having gone through the traumatic experiences, recognizing that we can't take away those experiences that they've had, but how do we help them make meaning of those and grow stronger for having had those experiences? And how do we lift up their family members, their most important people in their world, in supporting them through that experience as well? Next slide. So Tedeschi and colleagues have looked at and reflected on this notion of this concept of post-traumatic growth, and what are the many things that go into supporting post-traumatic growth in an experience who's in an individual who's gone through traumatic experiences. And they share this kind of 5-domain conceptualization of what post-traumatic growth looks like. If you want to keep scrolling down, please go ahead. So one of those first domains is this area of new possibilities, recognizing that having gone through this experience, now there are things maybe available to me in my life that I may not have had that opportunity for before. And some of the quotes that you're going to see under each of these domains come from this revised post-traumatic growth inventory for children. There's an adult version of this and a youth version of this, and both of those you can find online. And these specific quotes are from the child version of this, the way they conceptualize this sense of each of these areas. So for new possibilities, I have a chance to do things that I couldn't before, or I have new ideas about how I want things to be. Maybe I see things through a different lens now, having gone through these experiences. This notion of relating to others, having gone through this has actually brought me closer to people in my most important people in my world. And we often see this and experience this with children and their caregivers, even through going through treatment, that relationship grows, strengthens, fortifies throughout that process. I learned how nice or helpful people can be during some of these toughest and darkest times that we've experienced. Personal strength, I think therapeutically, this is such an important area of work that we do in supporting families. I can handle things more. I've got more capacity. I've got more skills, tools, resources to be able to handle the tough times and the big things. And we actually see that through research as well, that having gone through traumatic experiences in some ways fortifies or enhances the resiliency of youth and of adults in going through future experiences. Now they have the skills that they can take into this, or their understandings of themselves in the world, that will help them understand future experiences. Appreciation for life. I appreciate or enjoy each day more. I know what's important to me. It's kind of a resetting of those priorities and understandings, and not sweating the small stuff, but recognizing what's most important and treasured and valued and in life. And most importantly, this last domain of spiritual change, that through this experience, my faith or belief in God, in whatever definition of God is to me and in my family, has grown stronger. And I understand how God works better in my belief system, my understandings. Thank you. You can pass it, tag on. Okay, so I'll tag back over to Dee.
We're going to be going back and forth a little bit as we think about the slides, because we have integrated this into a model that has cultural teachings attached to each of one of the components. And so what we want to do is share with you as we look at how we focus on the trauma treatment and how that's tied to culture. This is just a picture of the cultural healing camp at Northern Cheyenne in Montana. Next slide. So what we want to do is understand what we bring from American Indian, Alaska Native knowledge. What is it that is there that helps us think about what is healing, what is resiliency, what is strength, how do we uplift? So as we think about, Indigenous knowledge, what it is recognize that individuals are in the center of that circle or that circle of care that we have heard many times of seventh generation or extended families, that is a way of thinking about each individual being in that center and growing from that center. And so as we think about that individual in the center of the circle, I think we have a lot easier time of thinking about children being in the center of the circle. And that imagery is easier to come by. It's not always an immediate thing when we think about just adults being in that center of the circle, but there's a lot of ceremony where individuals are in the center and the support is around that circle. So individuals in the center of the circle, awareness of the needs of that individual, and especially aware of the trauma reactions. That there's a lot of different kinds of trauma reactions, and some of it can be fairly specific to a particular event. In Oklahoma, we get a lot of tornadoes, and the siren that goes off to warn of tornado can be pretty triggering for some people. So what kind of awareness to trauma reactions that children have, but the body responds in a certain way, the mind responds in a certain way. There's certain kinds of physical action. So how are those trauma responses typical? And so as we consider what those reactions are, what could be trauma triggers, trauma reminders, maybe a color of a car, maybe a song. I'll have to tell you, it's not a trauma trigger, but it is a heartbreaking trigger. We're going to get to listen to a song by Joanne Shenandoah, which is a lovely song. And she was a very dear, sweet sister friend that I spent much time with. We lost her last year. It was heartbreaking. It was totally unexpected. And so just the trigger of seeing her picture was a very tender moment for me. I loved her dearly, and it's tender. So being aware of what those triggers and reminders might be, understanding that relationship between trauma, fight, flight, freeze response, and in our in our model, as we talk about this fight, flight, freeze response, we talk about what did the elders tell us about the response of the buffalo? Did they huddle together, put those little ones in the center of the circle, and have that freeze response? Did they turn to the storm and have that fight toward the storm, or did they flee? Did they turn away from the storm and run from it? So as we have that understanding of what are the bodily responses to things that occur, and certainly being aware that when traumatized individuals are in a situation, they become hypervigilant. They may appear antsy and cautious and searching and acting in ways that may look like it's suspicious or they're hiding something, or constantly being this startle response. So how do we respond when individuals are in that mode? And information is constantly there, and so those calming features that we have, of, for example, using smudging, to help with that calmness. Being aware of trauma reminders and triggers may activate that emotional and physiological dysregulation. And what we talk about is how ceremony really teaches self-regulation. It really teaches that groundingness, and that it is common, that is typical, that it's expected, that it's normal to react in emotional and physiological ways, but it's also normal, typical, and helpful and reassuring to be able to help with that dysregulation and to have that self awareness and to be able to self-regulate. And that's what a lot of ceremony is around. Recognizing the importance of having predictability in one's life, recognizing the importance of consistency and maintaining expectations. And we talk about routine, consistency. We also talk about protocol. And I think one of the things we certainly know is that within our tribal communities, protocol is very, very important. Recognizing people, protocol is sort of taken for granted, I think, because when we have grand entrances or when we have, feast days or we have ceremony, there's a lot of protocol into that. And so the protocol is about that predictability. It's about consistency. It's about maintaining those expectations. And really the understanding that when there is trauma, it can distort those relationship building skills. We have a lot of shame in our lives because we are an honor-based society, and shame has replaced honor. And so because of that, it creates a distortion about how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves being in relationships with other people. So, and this leads to that respect for certain coping methods that might have worked well in prior situations. We rely on those things that were sort of fallback, that they worked in certain situations. And now, with the understanding of the impact of trauma, with the understanding of incorporating things like protocol in terms of or relaxation skills like smudging, the importance of reevaluating their usefulness and safety, and that how well do these things work? If it's avoidance or if it's commercial cigarette smoking, what are the things that we can reevaluate now and make different kinds or better decisions because we have this new understanding of how this indigenous knowledge has been a foundation for a long time in helping us manage trauma. Next slide. So what we want to do is use this old wisdom. Trauma has always been in Indian country. It's not something new, but we certainly know that the kinds of trauma that people are experiencing, have devastated our communities. And so how do we reclaim this old wisdom and our traditional healing ways? And how do we utilize the ceremonies that are there to help? Because that was what we used initially to deal with trauma, was ceremony, either to prepare for an event or following an event in order to recognize, renew, acknowledge, purify, transition, and stabilize. And at one time, we recognized how important transitioning was in our communities, and ceremony was used for those transitions. Transition from pregnancy to a new birth, transition from a child not talking to a child talking, transitions from coming of age or time for a new name, or there was all these transitions, and those transitions help as we think about managing things that were difficult, and learning how to have that identity of self and have that confidence in oneself, being able to master emotions and master difficult encounters. So we are hoping by looking through this cultural enhancement of trauma-focused CBT that we're able to help individuals, children, and their families move toward a healing place. Next slide. So what we have done is the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral protocol is an evidence-based practice, which we want evidence-based practice. We want things that work. There's been so long that things have been introduced into our tribal communities that are harmful, that do not work, that produce more trauma. And so what we want to do is look at what evidence-based practice that works, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and how that fits with a practice-based evidence. The model, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, is driven by cognitive behavioral principles, attachment, humanistic, developmental neurobiology, and empowerment theory. But we know that we also have theory that is within our own indigenous knowledge. So we've always had thinking and feeling. We've always been observers. We wouldn't have the information we have currently if there wasn't, those that thought out things. I mean, even if we think about the medicine wheel, somebody thought that out, that it was a circle, that it had components, that it had, teachings associated with different components, colors, animals, so that thinking out what is meaningful and having it illustrated by a medicine wheel, an actual medicine wheel. Feelings, we wouldn't have things like wiping of the tears ceremony, combing of the hair, wrapping of the cloth, all of those things, and then just doing. So the behavioral principles of actual physical or behavioral, and so we see that from many generations back, a lot of our tribal communities train birds of prey to get rodents and other things. They train birds of prey, they train dogs, they train horses, but they also recognize those behavior principles in shaping behaviors of children. And there's been a lot of records over many generations of children being seen as being attended to. And so, for example, you look at diaries from the French that came through. They talk about how children was well behaved, how parents respected them. Even Abraham Maslow in the 30s talked about how children were respected, how they were listened to. So this doing, the behavioral principles have been there for a long time. The circle in terms of relational and attachment, humanistic, we're all related, whether it's the two-legged ones, the four-legged ones, to land, to water, to wind, to earth, and that broader understanding of relational connections. Developmentally, we understand it because of naming. Again, the medicine wheel that is developmental in concept and in teachings. Neurobiology, again, that thinking part of it, we knew the earth was round. We knew we were not the center of the universe. There's those racial memories, and we know now that, for example, Scott Momaday talks about racial memories or blood memories. And we know now that mind, body, heart, spiritual connection has always been within our teachings. And then empowerment, we recognize the teachings of non-interference, non-judgmental, that individuals' decision-making is important, being able to support that individual's decision-making. And so this is where we see that children are able to make choices even early on. So how important that is to have that understanding that people have a mind, they have thinking, they have reason, they have decision-making powers. So this is the basis for our trauma-focused cognitive behavioral protocol, and this is how we bring in the indigenous knowledge and the practice-based evidence and the orientation to the honoring children, mending the circle. Next slide. So what we want to do within this model, honoring children, mending the circle, TFCBT, is to really teach about that sacredness that is part of that, or actually the foundation for practice-based evidence, that we are an honor-based society, that if we believe in honor, then we believe in sacredness. So to teach that wellness is spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and relational balance, that these are all interconnected aspects of self, that we help children and their families to draw upon those traditional healing practices. And by understanding that interconnectedness, by recognizing the traditional healing practices that have always been there, and they help with that balance, it moves children and their family toward that enthusiasm for life, that sense of hope, that willingness to meet new challenges. And this is where that post-traumatic growth, evolves. And through that, it increases that sense of self-identity, that sense of self-worth, and that self-knowledge that, things can be tough, but the capacity to grow from that, to master, reminders, to master triggers, to have that foundation that life is worthwhile. Next slide.
So the next two slides in this deck talk a little bit more about this model, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy that we're talking about, and I'm not going to take a deep dive into that, but these are available for you should you want to know more about the model itself. We selected this because it really does have the best demonstrated effectiveness in reducing post-traumatic stress in children and youth all the way from 3 to 18. And it can be done so in a relatively short time period. And I like to think when we're conceptualizing post-traumatic growth that it does a really beautiful job of starting to plant the seeds for post-traumatic growth that we know will continue to grow throughout an individual's life. I think for children and adolescents, as they grow and hit new developmental phases, we often, turn back and look at our prior experiences and try to make sense and understanding of them based on who we are now and our life and our experience and all those experiences that we've had. And I think that for children recovering and growing through trauma, that's a very similar process. And so within this model, we're really working to start to plant those seeds that will continue to grow into this beautiful post-traumatic growth. Next slide. This is a very busy slide. Again, I'm not going to talk in detail about this, but this is really just to recognize that for this intervention, we have a structure. We have a process, a format through which we walk through growth and healing through trauma for children and adolescents. And that this structure, whether it's the original through any adaptations or enhancements of that model, remain the same. This is our kind of backbone for intervention. Now, how do we breathe life into it in a way that makes sense for the youth and the families that we serve? And how do we tailor it to help support meaning-making post-traumatic growth for that particular youth, for that particular family? That's where I think the creativity and the beauty of TFCBT comes to play. Next slide. And you can scroll them down, so I'll have them all. Yeah, so let's go back to and think about in what ways are we looking in trauma-focused intervention for youth and for adults? What are we looking to really help support in terms of post-traumatic growth? What seeds are we looking to plant? And one of those first pieces is recognizing and helping youth and caregivers and adults know that you're not alone. Trauma can feel so isolating and stigmatizing and shaming that we want to bring it out of that dark to a place where they know that we're here by their side. We're going to walk this chapter with them. We're going to support them in this journey of healing, and that others have gone through similar experiences and have endured and survived and healed and grown and can thrive after these experiences. So we're really kind of holding that torch of hope for the families that we serve until they feel like they can hold that torch themselves. And we also are looking to enhance caregiver and youth connection. And because we want to lift those caregivers up as those most important individuals in that child's life, recognizing that we have a very limited time in serving the families that we work with. And so how can we empower caregivers to be those supports to their children throughout their continued journey? And we recognize that trauma plays a lot of tricks on us, right? There are a lot of reasons why we may come to believe ourselves after these experiences that maybe there's something wrong with me that this happened, or maybe it's my fault, or maybe people can't be trusted, or the world's not safe, or my future won't be a good one based on things that I experienced. It makes sense based on these experiences that children and adults may come to these beliefs, but we also know that they can't be healthy and helpful places for them to be. So how do we help them grow through and recover from and shift those narratives, those stories they tell themselves in ways that can lead to post-traumatic growth in themselves? Next slide. And so one aspect of any form of trauma-focused treatment, including TFCBT, is also giving them some skills for being able to manage and navigate the stressors that they experience in their life, prior stressors and the echoes, the shadows of that, in addition to the future experiences that they're going to face. And so, Dee, are there a couple words you want to say about this particular element?
Yes, when we think about cognitive coping, it's what are the things that we tell ourselves, or what are the things that have been told to us that's helpful? How do we form a image or a story in our heads to help us manage? And one of the things that is very common is instructions in terms of entering, such as a sweat lodge or ceremony, is to leave those bad thoughts at the door and enter in a good way. So just that instruction can be helpful, or maybe in the ceremony or in the sweat lodge, those sweat lodge is a ceremony, that entering that structure, then putting those bad thoughts into the fire or on those grandfather rocks, that is a physical way of having that release. And then being able to use imagery when you're away from that lodge to eliminate unhelpful thoughts. So using stories, using those that sense of space to help with that cognitive coping. Next slide.
Yeah, go ahead and scroll through. And how do we ensure that therapeutically we're creating a safe and sacred space for families to be able to address and navigate spiritual impacts? And go ahead, you can move to the next slide. And one aspect of this is reflecting on within their own family what practices that may be most important to them to incorporate into this healing process. Dee?
So one of the worksheets that we have that clinicians can use with their families is a native healing practice that the family might identify. We use singing a goodbye song after a family member has passed away as an example. And so what is the activity, object, the item that might be engaged in? What would be the use or purpose? So helping family members say goodbye, recognize that the family member spirit is in a new journey. And so the meaningfulness or the value might be giving permission for the spirit to journey onward, to acknowledge that this is a transition period for everyone. Again, recognizing that transition period. How do we help families move through this? How do we help individuals move through that? Give permission to mourn. That's what these goodbye songs are about. Provide a structure for mourning and serve as a reminder. So all of these things can be part of that strengthening, part of that value around why songs are important. And so what we do is we ask the clinician to identify what would be the trauma-focused CBT components that are supported by this healing and wellness activity. Next slide.
And the last element here is understanding and recognizing the power of storytelling as a teacher, as a healer in support of post-traumatic growth, and recognizing that we can understand what are some key elements of understanding my experiences in life, and appreciating, for example, the paradoxes that we may experience in life: loss and gain, support and individual strength, grief and gratitude, vulnerability and strength, those grays in life, and how we can grow through and grow beyond those experiences. And Dee, I'll tag to you for our last slide.
Thank you. So the way that our Honoring Children Mending the Circle is set up is that at the beginning of each of the components, there is a story. And some of the stories are from, different teachings. And so this is one story that we have. I'll read it to you. Your life is built on the life of your ancestors, and the gifts you give to them is enduring for future generations. There is always someone in back of you and someone ahead of you. Everyone wants a record of what happened because we learn through the experience of others. Your story will benefit future generations. This is your own story, your yesterday, your today, and your tomorrow. And so this is how we help set up, a story for the next component that the child or youth and their family engaged in order to build that strength, in order to build that resiliency, in order to have those skills to move forward and think about their healing process that they're in. So we're grateful that we had the opportunity to give you this brief overview of this cultural enhancement of trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. We recognize that it is a short overview, and if you're interested in learning more, we'll be happy to share more, or go to the Indian Country Child Trauma Center, or the Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, or the Oklahoma Child Trauma that Susan runs, and Susan can give you the website for that. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I have been taking notes like mad throughout your presentation, and I want to know more. We put the link in the chat of where people can find out more about the model, and I think we'll just turn it over to Livia right now for reflections.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Livia Davis. I put in the chat box that I see myself as a non-native guest in this native space. And the question on the slide and the question in the chat box, as you can see, is what is the story that you tell yourself to support growth after trauma? And I see some of you are already starting to respond in the chat box. We invite you to put responses in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and our team will unmute you. And if we have enough time to have a couple of comments. Allison, I see you're saying that I am stronger than I know. Yes, that's a great story. Anna, we see the universe is wise, and at the end, everything will be okay. I am my own success. There's a lesson in every experience, especially in the negative ones, from Genevieve. And Kristen from I Am My Own Success. Dolores, Corey, all living things, including me, has a purpose. And Kristen, Sundin, you're saying there's a reason for pain in life. Bonnie, you're saying you're more than your trauma. You are your triumphs too. The way of a human being takes many paths, some a little rockier. I have lived through difficult things before. But these stories and this feedback is just so reflective of the importance of storytelling as a teacher. We are listening from Tijuana in northern New Mexico. Welcome. Karen, you're saying the trauma is not me, it's something that's happened to me, and like an old sweater, it has become too comfortable, or it's time to change. So really looking at the trauma as a visual, as a thing that can be changed. Christy saying nothing is wasted. There's beauty that can grow from the ashes. Yes. And Allison, what I've learned from this and learned about myself, what will have I learned that will help me in the future? Asking, what has happened that can help me in the future? And April, you're talking about because of you having recovered from trauma, that you can help others. Yeah, those are some great stories and narratives to use. I didn't see anyone with hands up specifically. Am I missing a hand? I'm just scrolling down to see. Okay. Deborah, you're saying, because of my trauma, I have become the healed version of myself to help others heal. I loved that the healed version of myself. That's a great metaphor. Just checking to see if there's any hands raised. All right. Even a step backward may help me in my journey. Yes. Yes. These are great. These are great. The trauma is not me. Powerful narratives indeed. We so thank you for sharing. And please keep putting them in here. We just love seeing them. And I'm going to turn it back over to Holly. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Just in closing, and after these comments that I have, we always end with another video, another song, and so stay on if you can for that. I just want to thank Dr. Bigfoot and Dr. Schmidt for that information. I know it's a short amount of time, but it was packed full of really important information, and I'm so grateful for you all for the work that you do. Susan and Dee. And I think the one word that I picked up on and wrote down in bold is mastering. I think that the work that you do to help children and their families master the triggers and reminders so that they take control, and it's not controlling them. But I think the whole concept of mastering is not only incredibly important right now, but I think it lessens a person who suffered through trauma from being more susceptible to later in life to dependence on substance use to try to deal with those trauma. You're teaching them how to master those triggers now. And I do think that is incredibly important because so many people, as we know, that slide into substance misuse and addiction or often do so because of unresolved trauma, that they have not learned how to master those events that they either witnessed or happened to them. So that's just so incredibly important for the whole substance use field in general. I love the tree example of that visual of the tree, the poor tree that, nearly got blown to smithereens in that terrible time back in Oklahoma with the Oklahoma City bombing, and then how it came back, but yet it was changed. That's a wonderful example. And thank you for sharing with us the 5 forms, the 5 types of post-traumatic growth. I think that's incredibly important for people to realize that. And then Dr. Bigfoot, the examples that you give about ceremony and tribal protocol and self-regulation and comfort is just really rich information. So yes, and mastery is part of the Gona teaching as well, gathering of nations. I just can't thank you enough. People are going to be wanting information. We put your link in the chat, and I'm sure people will be looking for you later and trying to get a little bit more information about this. So we thank you 1,000 times for this. And then the next slide, I think, is, and Ken Craybill wasn't able to join us today. He's our partner, does a lot of trauma-focused clinical supervision teaching. Oh, he is here. Ken, do you have anything you want to
Hey,
share?
Kelly, I put it in the chat box and I'll
Oh,
leave it there.
I didn't see it.
I just said that trauma, they say that trauma that's not transformed is transmitted, but it's also true that trauma that is transformed is also transmitted for good, which so many of you are paying testimony to.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think we can move on to the next slide, and we're just going to, I think there's a couple of other little notes here.
Yes, this is Brian Hendricks. Don't forget to complete your survey at the end of the that will be given in the chat box. This is actually not the right link. I just realized that. It's for the May 24th. It'll have May 24th at the end of that link. Make sure you click on that link and take the survey. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact either Bernice or myself at our email addresses below. And
then will that link work though when they click on it for the survey, Brian? Or
the
will
link
it-
in the chat box will, yes.
Oh, link in the chat box is the one they should click on.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. And then the next is, I just want to say something about the music here when we finish. So next month, same time, same place, 4th Tuesday of every month, 11 Pacific, and then all the way across the time zones. Next month is assessment and diagnosis through an Indigenous lens. We're actually calling it Danica Sacred Trust, assessment and diagnosis through Indigenous lens. And Danica, Dr. Danica Brown from Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, who has joined us today, she'll be presenting that, co-presenting that with our friend Jeff King from Western Washington University. So, and then Dee, thank you for mentioning our friend Joe Gahn. I did speak with Joe, and he is going to do a presentation for us in October. So we're going to transition to our ending for the day and sending you off in a good way. We want it to really honor Joanne Shenandoah.
And on behalf of USET, thank you all for joining today.
In walking through life, many of us are guided by our dreams. Aguego, lana de son a, scalonia de. For so long, I dreamed a dream where the sweet grass still grows and where the wise ones still know how to dream. For so long, I dreamed a dream where the people spoke their tongue and where the elders still teach the young. I dreamed a dream. To those that dream, I sing this song above and beyond the sky they dream. To those that dream above the stars, wherever they are, beyond the sky they dream. For so long I dreamed a dream where the fighters laid down their guns and where the people became as one. I dreamed a dream. For so long I dreamed a dream beyond all nations, all over they dream. To those that dream above the stars, wherever they are, beyond the sky they dream. For so long I dreamed a dream where the sweet grass still grows, and where the wise ones still know how to dream. To those that dream, I sing this song above and beyond. Skalunya day, beyond the sky they dream. To those that dream above the stars, wherever they are, Skalunya day, beyond the sky they dream. Aguego, lona ni so Skalunya day. Aguego, lona ni so Skalunya day. Aguego, lona ni so Skalunya day. Aguego, lona ni so Skalunya day.
Have a good day, everybody. Hope to see you next month.